I just said either or that. If the man was created with no reason or purpose, formed from...
Man was created with reason and purpose. We didn't find it. They were created with it by a non-mind, by a field of Dharma. The field of Dharma created man with purpose.
Right, but you're going out of what my...
Yeah, I mean, it's just Luke Ford and the dangers of e-personality. And he's an introvert, incel or whatever. And when he comes out on the internet, he has this, like the dark side of his subconscious becomes conscious. I mean, to me, it's obvious. It's what happens. It's what's happening to you on the same way. But your unconscious, your subconscious is different than Gandalf's subconscious.
Logic and science dictate that not only consciousness doesn't exist, consciousness is in fact scientifically impossible. And yes, it is going to involve math and calculus and science and computer programming. I'm sorry. And have different implications of the process with the connection between the levels of a person's soul and how it reincarnates.
But I'm not going to spur on the issue because I'm not a woman. It's not my issue.
About how one day you're going to fulfill the Canadian dream or the American dream. So you watch Seinfeld and say, I could do it. I'm going to go out tomorrow and go to work and have a great day, and I'm going to be successful. And one day I'm going to have my own apartment. I'm going to have my own parties with my own friends over, and I'm going to have my own possessions. I'm going to see things that I want and just buy them.
Yeah, but that's just so to say, a worthless opinion of yours.
Hello, and welcome back to Weekend Review with the one and only Doovid. I'm your host, Jen, aka COE, aka happy to be here. Why, that's me. Over to you, Doovid, for the introductions. Thank you for gracing us with your presence on this wonderful Sunday evening.
Hey, great to be back. Welcome, everybody. Got Spiritual Moms are in the chat. Kotov.
I think that's a fake ConOps account, or Spiritual Moms, or rather. I think that's fake. But anyway.
Yeah, it could be. Like the base takes was, God forbid, Kotov. I'm not sure if the famous chess author, Think Like a Grandmaster, one of the greatest books ever written, period, not just chess books. But let me go straight to screen share so I could get some of these things off my desk. Sorry if I got a little hiss going. My computer's hot and
I don't hear it anymore, actually. I think it's fine now. The audience can confirm what they think, but no, I don't hear it.
I moved the microphone so it wasn't directly next to the computer. Yeah, I need to upgrade my computer. Hopefully I get my car back and maybe I'll get that Apple, even this week. But I've been waiting for my car to come back. God forbid. Okay, so here we are, week in review. Okay, so I have almost 1,800 items up on my eBay page. See, I've been pounding through the listings. I got, I think, close to $13,000 worth of stuff for sale up. Been going pretty good. So I just got a bunch of these military books in. It's called Squadron Signal books. So I guess they're a company based out of England that makes models of like airplanes and ships. My dad loves this stuff, although he hasn't done it for years, but he used to make these models, and they have these books like with pictures and walkthroughs through an history of military vehicles. So I got a decent collection of them. Thank God they're a little bit more valuable, so I thought that was a little bit interesting. I was just putting those up on my eBay just before we got started. So plug my eBay here, Doovid on eBay, so you can see that interesting book, UFOs Are Real, was a little more valuable, like old collection. Here you can see some of these squadron military books. They're a little bit more valuable than your average books. They have nice pictures. Okay, so this was today in Speaker's Corner in London. So the Joseph Cohn there, and they brought like the big names from Zionists from Israel to argue with the Muslims. Not sure how well it went. They brought in like this Palestinian Arab Haddad that was there to say how awesome Israel is and all of the problems of Palestine is due to the Palestinians. And they argued with one of the more stronger critics of Israel in Speaker's Corner, and you could judge for yourself how that went. And here's another video of the same event. So it was a little bit interesting. I was on Zobida El Arabia's channel last night also, and we will talk about that, talking about the Mark Collett Matthew, the guy who was in Modern Day Debate and the live who debated Destiny, debated Mark Collett. And we're talking about racism and black on Jewish violence, God forbid. So here, Sabina Hassenfelder just made a video, I guess this is from yesterday, debunking all these claims that quantum mechanics proves that reality doesn't exist. So
yeah, I started watching that, but I didn't get all the way through just for time constraints. So in the end, she was debunking it, and reality is real, and don't look behind the curtain. Was that the overall sentiment?
Well, she's saying that, fact is that there's internal inconsistencies and problems with quantum mechanics, and we're in search of a new, better theory. Most notably with the measurement limit. So she was just saying that these internal inconsistencies or problems with quantum theory doesn't prove that reality doesn't exist. It just shows that the theory is not sufficient to explain all phenomenon. The short video. Maybe we talk about this a little bit more. I thought this was maybe interesting. Maybe you could even adapt your quantum periodic table or version of it based on the Ford circle. And it's just a simple algorithm so that you could make circles on a line that will...
It's very reminiscent of a Riemann sphere, isn't it?
No, the Riemann sphere is quite a bit complicated. Some of the most complicated mathematics.
Absolutely, it's like a much simpler version. It's like a much simpler version of it. Just aesthetically reminds me of it a bit. No, I don't want to get into a big thing about it. It's fine. We can continue.
Okay, yeah, it could remind you of it. The Riemann sphere is something very complicated that has intense mathematical purposes. This is just a method of embedding circles on a line so that you could see you have the one circle, and then you could have a halfway point, and the circle will perfectly fit in the holes and so on to smaller circles. And it's a pretty simple algorithm actually, and so you could see it's just circle of a center at p divided by q, and then the it's 1 divided by 2q squared, and the radius of 1 divided by 2q squared. And these Ford circles will give you a certain way of embedding circles on the number line. And here you could also I guess like a Riemann sphere in the complex plane, you could do a 3-dimensional version of the Ford circles. And so it's just an interesting way of representing circles in some sort of symmetric way.
It's a decomposition, right?
I'm not even sure what you'd call it. Yeah, I guess. So here's an interesting lecture on Sephardic Jews in America. Covers a lot of immigration to America history. Some of the stuff about racial things, Jews and being white, and immigration law, and white passing among Jews. So informative lecture with a lot of historical detail. They had the yearly Crazy House tournament this week. So I got 8th place, thank God. So here I beat this Russian grandmaster. We played twice. He beat me one game, Sergei Zigalko from Latvia. And here's the point where he realizes he's in trouble. and then you could see a few moves later, it's all over, and so that's at 3 hours and 3 minutes into the game, into his video. You can see Doovid takes him down. This is an interesting
Nice.
speech. God forbid this Jewish mayoral candidate in Louisville, Kentucky. God forbid someone possibly tried to kill him, fired some shots at him. They escaped, him and his staff, and then the Black Lives Matter bailed the guy out, so he's back out on the street. The guy who shot at him. So it's just interesting. American politics, guy running for governor, and it's unknown exactly what was going on. You could see his speech here, so it's kind of tough to know what he's gun violence. Sorry, people should be part of gun violence, but how are you going to deal with that in the current American society? So T-Jump was on Charles Moskowitz on Monday. Talk about that. Charles and his God forbid, I mean, kind of nonsensical, but just his way of joking about T-Jump converting to Judaism. Someone made a comment on T-Jump's version of the video. Actually, let me look that up. It was kind of informative, and you can see T-Jump kind of yawning. So you can see you don't have to have a consistent, coherent worldview to somewhat be successful in life, and so T-Jump kind of like destroys Charles on every point. However, here it is, truth seeker. He's a nice guy, but I notice he brings up a topic, claims it is unexplainable. Then as soon as he sees you can actually explain it beyond the first pushback, he quickly changes to the next topic. He seems scared to listen to the full explanation that may change his mind. He does this over and over.
Problem is that like his comments aren't unbiased. Like they said nothing positive about you or I. So let's be careful when citing comments on Teach's videos, given his audience who is likely to comment on said videos.
Yeah, I mean they're usually negative. I was just saying that was somewhat informative comment. I always think, God forbid, the quoted Mein Kampf was like, gradually I began to hate them. That's kind of
maybe not the best thing to quote on YouTube. Just thinking, sort of a weird thing to say. But anyway, let's continue without more comments.
It could be any form of dissonance, and just how do you go about changing a person's mind? And then we talk to a person, it's like, I defeated you, I convinced you you're wrong, but then here he is right back with the exact same argument, again, and so T-Jump here with Zen Shapiro, his argument.
Yeah, this one was. Were you watching still when it ended?
Yeah, I watched it till at least in 2-speed.
Well, he came back at the end. Oh, many hours after it ended, rather.
Well, he came back on the Crucible?
No, on T-Jump's stream, sorry.
Zen Shapiro came on T-Jump's stream?
Yeah. Back on his Discord. I guess he was still streaming, I think.
Yeah, it looks like T-Jump went on after for a few hours, and so you're saying at some point Zen Shapiro joins his Discord?
Yeah. Well, he's gone in the habit of continuing on with like a chill stream type thing after his interviews.
And
he just did one today that was 6 hours long.
Well, yeah, I didn't see that much, but Zen Shapiro joined his Discord to debate more. We could talk about that. It was
only very briefly.
Limited logic. There's a random thing on Facebook I saw sometimes, God forbid I'm getting older, so I end up watching these like cute animal videos. So
hold on a minute. Watching cute animal videos is a sign of getting older? Isn't it a sign of being a kid? Either way. What kind of cat videos
I mean returning to your childhood type is a sign of getting older. So I mean you grow up, and then you get rid of your childhood proclivities, and then as you get older you return to some of the childlike proclivities. So this was kind of like a superstition that they said, like when someone dies they return as a robin. to see his grandkids. Like the kids here in the video, their grandfather had just passed away, and like therefore this they, I guess they kind of, I mean, I don't know if they had a you know well thought out view of reincarnation, but some sort of superstition, like the grandfather was using the robin to look and visit their grandkids, which be interesting. Could you give a reincarnation type explanation? Would it be temporary, like the grandfather took birth in the robin just so he could watch over or see his grandkids one more time, and it was the whole life, or just like a temporary type thing where the soul of his grandfather entered the robin temporarily and was kind of like a possession, not a reincarnation. But just kind of like a random video where the robin gets up, real up close to these kids, and then, so this little superstition, was it the soul of his grandfather? There's an interesting video on video game history on like world records. So this was on Super Punch Out, covering the breaking of world records, and it's interesting because the very top players have basically figured out the algorithm perfectly to know what happens when it happens and what's random. And so the very best record requires optimal circumstances based on the randomness. That like a certain time, like one fighter could do certain moves, and he does certain moves like 5 out of 8 times or 1 out of 4 times, and the time based. And then to have the certain best time, you need certain things to happen, which is quite rare. Could be one in millions even. But these people who went for the very world championship lowest score, have literally done it like tens of thousands of times. So I think I've shown this channel before, but it has playthroughs of these old video games and just like a history of these world records. And interesting, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about chunking theory in relationship to knowing exactly what the computer is going to do. And then even some of the players even looked into the code of the computers. And I guess also not for the world record, but you could actually run it on a computer and do frame by frame, and then you could actually manually input what you want the controller to do on what frame. That could be actually impossible for a human player using the controls. But so it's pretty interesting, the intensity of how much someone could play a video game to try to so to say be the best. God forbid the new ADL report, the COE, Center of Extremism, on too big to even share, on murder and extremism in the United States. So God forbid. Check that out. The Louis Theroux, that dropped last Sunday night as we're doing a week in review with the BBC documentarian. I remember I watched his documentary on the Westboro Baptist Church, but he did Forbidden America streamers, including Nick Fuentes, Baked Alaska, Brittany Venti, and Beardsley, who is now a regular on Politically Provoked. I had my run-ins with Beardsley, and so if anyone watched that Louis Theroux, maybe we would briefly talk about that. I was on House of Commons with Ralph. We briefly talked about that also. So it looks like on will that be Wednesday? On Wednesday, 9:30 in the morning, Guy Davy Uzma is going to have a chanting stream, bhajans go through, right? So hopefully I'll join, and we'll chant some bhajans. So I was on, was it last week, Sunday, where I was on last? So
wasn't it a little longer ago than that?
2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was 2 weeks. 2 weeks ago, Monday. So a week from 2 weeks from yesterday. So she's still active, and so maybe Wednesday I'll be on her channel again, and it'll just be chanting. So we talked about the James Webb Telescope. So it's there. It's reached its destination point, and now it's getting to its final status, which might take a few more weeks. So it took a little bit more than a month for it to get into the Lagrange 2 point, and now that it's at the Lagrange 2 point, it's been like another month, and they're setting it up so that in another 3 months, I guess, it'll be calibrated and ready to make some recordings. So stay tuned for that. Here, Israel now is investing 200 million shekels, which is actually not that much. I mean, it'll be depending on how
I
much
can
the
look it up
shekels-
real quick too, American, to just continue.
Yeah, it'd probably be like $50 to $80 million, depending on where the shekel is. But trying to make a quantum computer, so good for Israel, making a quantum computer. Here, I think Memes was mentioning it. Wolfram now is coming out with his videos on his book, The Foundations of a New Kind of Science. So I didn't have a chance to watch that yet, but check that out. So he's done chapter 2 already. So maybe the next few days he'll even do chapter 3. So with that's my week in review. I don't think I did a chant last week. Do you want to hear a song?
Oh, absolutely.
So I was streaming with Charles, and like, God forbid, we went for like 2.5 hours, and you're talking about Israel, and I had this picture
You're
of like
almost at the sibling level of affectionate antagonism now.
Yeah, and so I had the when I was young, I really liked Pink Floyd's The Wall, and I probably listened to it maybe hundreds of times, like in junior high school, and then in a period in New York, I was driving a lot, and I bought a few CDs, like 5 CDs, not many, and The Wall was one of them, and I listened to that like maybe tens of more times, and it was The Trial that was my favorite song. I would even listen to that one over and over again, and so for some reason, God forbid, I was thinking of that line. I think in Another Brick in the Wall Part 2, where their fat and psychopathic wives beat them to a pulp. God forbid, is some sort of explanatory, way for people, kind of their arguing, like the arguments they lose with their wife that they take out on other people. But The Trial was one of my. Are you familiar with that song, The Trial, from The Wall?
I just know the Brick in the Wall song, but that's about it.
Yes, I think it's loosely based on Franz Kafka's The Trial, which I actually just sold. I was selling books, and I had a deluxe edition modern library of The Trial. I think 2 copies that I sold. So it's funny that Roger Waters now is like on the forefront of the BDS, like calling out Israel for God forbid mistreatment of Palestinians, and The Wall probably was made referring to the Berlin Wall. Now thinking to the apartheid wall, God forbid, in Israel. So near the end of The Wall is this like rock opera song of The Trial, which is kind of like this dystopian version of like Franz Kafka. So let me go for that. So I already got people in the chat who are familiar with the song and the lyrics. Good morning, Worm, Your Honor. The crown will plainly show the prisoner who now stands before you was caught red-handed showing feelings.
showing feelings of an almost human nature. This will not do. Call the schoolmaster. I always said he would come to no good in the end, Your Honor. If they let me have my way, I could have flayed him to shape. But my hands were tied. The bleeding heart's an artist. Let him get away with murder. Let me hammer him today. Crazy. Toys in the attic, I am crazy, truly gone fishing. They must have taken my marbles away. Crazy, toys in the attic, he is crazy. You little shit, you're in it now. I hope they throw away the key. You should have talked to me more often than you did, but no, you had to go your own way. Have you broken any homes up lately? Just 5 minutes, worm, Your Honor. Him, me alone. Babe, come to mother, baby, let me hold you in my arms. Bloat, I never wanted him to get in any trouble. Why do you ever have to leave me, worm, Your Honor? Let me take him home. Crazy. Over the rainbow, I am crazy. Bars in the window. There must have been a door there in the wall when I came in crazy. Over the rainbow, he is crazy. The evidence before the court is incontrovertible. There's no need for the jury to retire. In all my years of judging, I've never heard before of someone more deserving of the full penalty of the law. The way you made them suffer, your exquisite wife and mother, fills me with the urge to defecate, since, my friend, you have revealed your deepest fear. I sentence you to be exposed before your peers. Tear down the wall. So, God forbid, I listened to that song hundreds and hundreds of times in my youth. Um, yeah, sometimes you could even get a copyright strike just for singing. I think I'm off enough. I don't think the computer algorithm will pop that up without any music. That is actually one of the most widely sold popular CDs ever made. And so for whatever reason, all this arguing with Charles Moskowitz and thinking of like the current state of Israel made me think of that song. And I always thought it was somewhat of an irony that it would be Roger Waters now that is like the biggest name on the boycott, divestment, sanctions of Israel. So God forbid. So with that, that's my week in review. Doooovid, always a little bit quasi, toys in the attic. But let's move on. And, it's okay to be crazy.
I was not expecting that. Just
Did
loading
you recognize that song?
I didn't. I'm sorry. I'm somewhat out of touch with a lot of this stuff.
I think it's 1979. And it's definitely one of the most popular CDs of all time. That song itself is probably one of the less well-known songs that never made the radio. So it's unlikely they ever played that song on the radio. But if you listen to the CD, it's like near the end, and it's a little bit different than the other songs because it's like a rock opera with I think Roger Waters does all the voices, but the various characters. And like I mentioned, Frank Zappa's Freak Out the other week was possibly the first concept album in the 60s that the Wall is a concept album that is kind of like a narrative story from the beginning to the end, with the more classic ones like Another Brick in the Wall and Hey You, that would be more likely to still be played on the radio today. Comfortably Numb. So welcome to Week in Review. So how was your week? I did see your memes video. I caught that last night before I went to bed, or no, I watched it today, I think, actually.
What'd you think? And thanks for watching.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I'm not sure like I learned that much. So I mean, it's tough to follow like the value proposition if you're teaching one person or trying to explain things. And I think you have to look into chunking theory to have these things well formulated in your own mind, to know the logical steps of chunking, to recognize where
if I formulate them in my own mind, then I'm biasing the result. If I talk it out with another person, the result's actually going to be less biased than if I just reasoned it out on my own. Because even though I'm awesome, I still have something that would probably amount to a bias under most valuation criteria.
Well, you have to separate the idea from yourself and say, okay, because
what's the point of the approach is a pedagogical one primarily.
Yeah, but it's.
So you're saying it's not quite in a finished product. I'm going to agree with you.
I'm making a point on just expertise in chunking theory.
It's part of the process to have the conversations, and I agree with you on the end goal. So, yes, chunking theory.
Saying that you would understand a person's level of understanding, what pieces of information they are understanding decently or somewhat or not that well, and then based on that, to give them direction or information, and then to speak to the general audience to help them understand the totality of the theorem, and then the chunks that make up the theorem, so that they say, okay, this is complicated stuff. You may never understand this, or you may only, but you might be able to understand certain parts of it, and people at different levels understanding these parts, and so that would be.
It's kind of getting across the
sign of your
fundamental
own mastery.
notion. There's a fundamental notion of operating with uncertainty, and how using the technology, it's not possible to have a perfect knowledge of the technology in advance of using it. So there is I don't want to say leap of faith, because I think it's technology that can be validated by anyone in good faith. But it's an emotional thing. Not everyone is comfortable with working with something that they don't fully understand, or they don't feel like they fully understand. It's like we don't really fully understand any of these concepts that we use, but some concepts can fool us into thinking we understand them completely, whereas others more reveal the fact that they are transcendental concepts. Doesn't mean we can't use them, though. We just use them sort of. I don't want to say in spite of that. It's just integral to it.
For no reason. It's just.
I don't think it's defensive. All I'm trying to do is clarify what I'm trying to get across, because it seems almost like you think I'm being cagey, and I agree I'm being cagey. But it's a good intention caginess. That's all.
I mean, something that's somewhat obvious. Like, you haven't chunked your own idea, and therefore you have difficulty. You're teaching it, saying, the science of expertise, things I understand well, I could break down into steps, and I could teach someone based on the steps. And then as a teacher, I could have a relatively good feel for what the chunks or steps that they've mastered, and which ones they're gaining on, and which ones they're not there yet, to direct them. So, saying that just in terms of making good content, good videos that are useful to a wider audience. And I was mentioning that to Zabita also, like even to Ralph, to like recapping, to repeating opinions, good streaming. Mentioned to you last week,
to accurately be able to say over what the other person said. So, okay, this is what I believe, this is what they believe, this is what this person said, this is the logic behind their ideas. And, so if you've separated yourself from your own idea, then you could have the logic, just the chunks and the logic of what it takes to understand it. And, I also wanted to talk about more. I saw on Ralph, I think was it Don Willis there was asking, talking about this
I'm
high
not sure.
birth, low birth, and so I want to go a little bit more into this high birth, low birth, because I think it's the most triggering thing I say, and it's important because it's relatively
I would go
simple.
ahead and say maybe not, but let's hear it. I mean, come on, evolution thing. Anyway, let's not get derailed.
Well, I'm saying that, I mean, the concept is obvious that, like JF and his genetics, that what a person's capable of doing in life, the biggest factor is how they took birth, where they took birth. And, to put it into a perspective of high or low is triggering, because it's, because then it becomes like a competition or an insult to somebody's parents, or like, racism. But, just quantifiable, like if it's a person's karma and the sum totality of a person's karma is preserved, and they take higher or lower birth, it's because it's quantifiable, that this concept of what are the initial conditions a person could have in life, and then to quantify it. If it was looks, health, network. So I mean, the most thing, you have your family, you have your parents, you have your tribe, you have things that are largely have large components of genetic determinism, like health, um, race, intelligence, and then you have the tools that you're going to have in your life, based on high birth, meaning to say, okay, like if you have,
That's very abstract, and it sounds inflammatory.
well, it's saying it's
And
the
if you're
basis.
vague enough on what high birth means, in a way, it seems unfalsifiable.
Well, I mean, conceptually, it is unfalsifiable. Say if you just quantify.
So why
this-
take an inflammatory, vague, unfalsifiable position?
Well, it's not, because it's the basis of the Vedic and Kabbalistic wisdom, and especially for reincarnation. It's probably the main reason why they say you shouldn't study Kabbalah till you turn 40. And, because
Yeah, you
to
should go into that a little bit more, because I don't know that it's clear why that is. But that'd
well, I
be
mean, just
interesting.
you just think how triggering this concept of high or low birth, and so the Kabbalah talks extensively about this concept, and if you're looking in times where there's maybe royal lineages or extended family, and you look at your current situation, and even in a person's current situation, you say, okay, like you could have a trust fund. You could have hundreds of cousins, distant cousins, or close cousins that are millionaires and have positions of power. Like I mentioned in City Hall, you could go to City Hall, and the people in important positions of power could be your cousins. They could be from your network, and that's an element of high birth. That's not something you could achieve through your own accomplishments. You might be able to, so to say, accomplish the same result, and so to say, through your lifetime, through your own merit, to have built up a connection, a base, that when you go to City Hall, it's your network friend, someone that you have a karmatic connection with there and in various situations. But it's not the same as a birth factor. You're saying, like, okay, like in Metro Detroit, Alfred Ford is the convert to the Hare Krishna
It
movement.
just sounds like, yeah, you're sort of maybe pushing back against this narrative of all the Trump archetype, pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing.
It's extremely simple. It's triggering because it hurts. The truth hurts. Like to say, like, I'm just a poor boy from a poor family. Nobody loves me. Nobody cares about me. It hurts. And they say, okay, but there is such a thing as high birth. And like, I might just be a poor boy from a poor family, spare me my life of monstrosity. But there are people who took higher birth that aren't just poor people from poor family that no one cares about, and that level the truth hurts. And that's why, like, learning the Kabbalah before you're 40, um, because there's certain elements, uh, like lineage, like a certain question, like what's your name? Who's your daddy? Is he really rich like me? It's the basic. It's the first question. In England, I remember I was in Israel, because in America, it's not so much like that. But I had a lot of friends from England, and it's the first thing they ask you, like, who are your parents? Who are your parents' parents? Your lineage. And but there's large amounts of factors that are determined, not determined, but bounded, and set an initial condition from birth.
You're trying
And
to set the boundary conditions on free will. It kind of seems like, with this and your multiple truth hypothesis and chunking somewhere in between all that.
well, there's a basic reality that how you take birth is extremely important. And you could try to reject that. So if Jennifer has some sort of like, no, it doesn't matter how you take birth, it's completely irrelevant.
I just said what you're saying is essentially unfalsifiable. I would only take issue with potentially counter to our intention interpretations that would be appealing to make by people who didn't have the same transcendental wisdom that we do.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's probably meant to be triggering, because it's like fighting words just to mention the concept higher or lower birth. It's like Domingo or something. It's like like that it's because there's a certain nature of people who took low birth, desire to kill people who took higher birth, or certain elements, and that are possibly better not talked about, but are always known, always
That's why you're
there.
supposed to be guided by the principle of ahimsa in all your actions, so you know what to speak of.
Yeah, but I was saying, if you look at, like, just taking high birth to some extent is a violation of ahimsa. And you would see 100 movies.
I'm sorry,
100...
but that's just very confusing.
It's not confusing. It's saying, like, the wisdom.
How about start by citing a precedent to substantiate this absolutely incoherent position, please?
That people despise people that have things that they didn't work for. There's an element, like I mentioned, the Kabbalah, that
okay, I see. So jealousy happens when people inherit stuff because of parents of not having earned it. Okay, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, so if it's related that it's that when you have something that you didn't earn, or maybe theoretically you did earn in a past life, or some reason why someone took higher birth or lower birth, that it causes jealousy, hatred. And you could say it's a violation in and of itself of the ahimsa principle. That I mean, you'd have to ask a Vedic expert on the topic. The Kabbalist mentioned
well,
it.
Look at the precedent. I mean,
that it's like just taking high birth in and of itself is a violation of the ahimsa principle.
What was Krishna's birth?
Well, he's come from the royal family.
He took high birth then. Did he not?
Yeah, he took near highest birth. I mean, obviously he has Kamsa trying to kill him, but yeah, I mean, he's from the Pandavas. He's
what about Lord Ram?
Well, he's Krishna's cousin. I mean, they're from the nearest people to the throne in the main line of the royal family. I mean, there's a dispute between the two families and the territories that leads into the battle of Kurukshetra. But I'm saying, even being from the disposed royal family that has a claimant to the throne, when there's another branch of the royal family that's on the throne, is relatively high birth. So I mean, even if you're from
Can
a
I
royal
just real
line,
quick? Oh, go ahead, finish up.
I mean, there's really, I'm saying it's not meant to be argued. It's very difficult for people to grasp.
Yeah, I'm not trying to argue with you either. I actually fully appreciate what you're saying, and just wanted to real quick before the chat moves away about the 369. Just to be clear here, it's not up to me to interpret Nikola Tesla's errors. It's up to other people to say, this is why you should care about Tesla. He's about on par with Elon Musk in terms of how much of a fuck I give about him at this point. Just make that clear. Also, 369. Numerology, as I've said many times, is the first step towards insanity. But the universe functions on what could be argued to be a numerological basis. So you have to sort of navigate those two truths with care and caution. Don't care to comment on this numerological phenomenon at this time. Thank you very much. And sorry about the digression.
Yeah, I'm going to say certain things like wisdom, experience have to be earned no matter how high or low birth you take. However, the majority of tools in this lifetime are achievable with no work, in terms of it could be that you were just born with it, like money, connections, networks, resources, you have various things that, like, like I said, like a debate school, like, oh, I love debate, so I'm going to join a debate school. And you say, okay, but theoretically, I mean, not theoretically, like almost by definition, there's going to be someone who took high birth, whose parents had a debate school, and so to say, inherited the debate school. And so being a good debater isn't something you could inherit, but you could have taken high birth, and like you could be Sam Harris's kid or something. You'd be Jordan Peterson's daughter, or you could be Alex Stein, or or name of like the Royal Society. You could have been born into the Royal Society, and doesn't make you wise, but you have by birth membership and access to something that if you took average birth, you might have to you work extremely hard for decades. You might have to win competitions and overcome insurmountable odds just to gain membership. But when you do gain membership, there will be people there that just inherited and were born members. And to some extent, that's the case with basically everything. That you could become a millionaire, even a billionaire. There's going to be someone who just inherited that has what you have without work, that just inherited it. And from a spiritual point of view, your tests in life are largely determinative from your birth, because so to say, okay, we don't have a debate school, we don't have any of these things, so you have to work at it. And the test in life for the things that you do have. And then I was mentioning to like Jennifer for publishing that you have to, you can't be born published. You could be the kid of a professor.
Yes, you can just cite yourself in your past lives.
No, I mean,
if you're published in your past lives, yes, you can.
No, I mean, you're still not born published. I'm saying even if you had memories of your past life, there's no connection. You can't garner anything that, I mean, if there was a phenomenon of a person that somehow was able to demonstrate that they were, or had a community of people that accepted that they were someone in a past life, maybe they would be garnered membership to a certain society, or have, people that would come ask them questions. But even in that case, like say, no, you couldn't, you would still have to go through the process to publish.
And that's what we're on the journey towards right now.
Well, and possibly that's why I was mentioning.
Possibly, but these conversations with people really are important for me to understand the jargon, etc.
Well, that's why the point I went, like, for Jennifer's sake, is this concept of exceeding expectations. So if you have an objective goal that let's say is non-personable, there's just a goal to be accomplished, and you could separate it from the greatness that it would take for a human to accomplish it, or the work that would be necessary for a human to accomplish it, as opposed to just the goal, like solving Fermat's last theorem, Hilbert's questions, any sort of quantifiable goal. They'd be like, wow, that would be really something, someone could accomplish that. Or something like a theory, like a quantum periodic table, like, wow, that's really something that someone accomplished that, versus objectively what was accomplished in some sort of estimation at the work level, expertise that requires a human to accomplish it, versus exceeding expectations. Because exceeding expectations is largely based on how you take birth. that so I remember I God forbid I was in junior high school. I was part of a bowling league, and somehow like most of the people in the bowling league were like much younger than us, and they had a handicap. So like like I don't know, I bowled something like in 100, and maybe towards the end of the league I was bowling in the mid hundreds, but the other people in the league were bowling in like the tens, and towards the end of the league were like bowling 100. So we finished near the end of the league because these people had huge handicaps. So like exceeding expectations is saying that a person accomplished more than based on their level of birth they were expected to accomplish. It could just be going to university, it could be publishing, it could be you being a millionaire. You're like, okay, if you're born poor or middle class, becoming a millionaire is definitely exceeding expectations. If no one in your college, your families went to university, you're the first person to go to university. That's the expectation exceeding of expectations, as opposed to some sort of objective goal that has no factor in expectation accomplishment level. Like this was just the goal that was set to achieve, and without a factor of who the person is and what they had to go through to accomplish it. And that's the main factor probably of the importance of high or low birth is the certain level, the feeling of accomplishment, because accomplishment is based off of the journey. And if a person takes high birth, many accomplishments aren't really that much of an accomplishment. If a person took low birth, many things that really aren't that much of an accomplishment are quite an accomplishment. And also like the seriousness level, like if you took low birth, you say like no one's going to understand what the hell you're talking about. Saying like it doesn't matter, you could try explaining this stuff from now till forever, no one's going to understand you because you took low birth, your peers and colleagues took low birth, and it's just out of range for them. And so there's a certain factor in it, like versus the academy. And so if you were born into the academy or something like that, and you say, well, maybe all your peers would be expected to understand it, and you would have been expected to understand it. And so it's a factor that people themselves have to keep in mind for their levels of their accomplishment, and also how you communicate. Like God forbid, that's why it's triggering. Just to say, to keep a person on point to the level of accomplishment by reminding them that the reason they're acting this way is, so to say, because they took low birth and they're missing the achievement level of exceeding expectation versus some sort of objective goal meeting. So that's what I wanted to mention. The why probably taking high and low birth is one of the supreme concepts of Vedic wisdom and Kabbalistic wisdom, and why it's so triggering. It's like a break point for your average person. They can't enter the higher forms of wisdom because just this concept of higher or lower birth is so triggering to them. And that's probably because it's by nature a violation of the Ahimsa principle, where it's just like, oh, money is not a problem. Why is money not a problem? Because his dad's a billionaire. And so that's just triggering, saying, what are you talking about? Like, that's a lot of money. They're like, no, that's not a lot of money. Like it's Babs. Like he's got a trust fund. Like it's really not a
Maybe
big
we
deal.
can just move on to another topic. Like I don't know why we're still beating this dead horse, frankly.
It's not a dead horse. I'm saying it's really the factor of accomplishment and the recognition of what is accomplishment, because accomplishment, to some extent, you could look at objective accomplishment, but in reality, accomplishment is measured in terms of level of birth, and that's why it's triggering, because you say like I'm pretty proud of my accomplishments, and then you say, well, your accomplishments aren't really that great of accomplishment. It's only relative to your low birth that your accomplishment, or if you took high birth, just to detract from the accomplishment, to say, well, your accomplishment's not really that big of a deal because you took high birth. And like if anybody had took in birth like you, they would have been expected to easily have accomplished what you accomplished, and you had more. Saying like everyone in my family has PhDs and doctor and lawyers, and I only have a bachelor's. That's not an accomplishment. It's a lack of accomplishment because I was expected to do more, and so am looked at
relatively as a failure, even though from some medium view, my level of accomplishment is quite high.
Yeah, so moving on, I was trying to get the gang to consider what the best evidence for Big Bang was. Because I do actually think it's worth considering. Nobody would stand by a position, which concerned me. Do you have an opinion? I'm not talking about a list of things. I'm talking about a single piece of evidence you consider the best substantiating evidence for the Big Bang.
So I'm actually listening. I'll share the link of the company came out with a course the last. Oops.
Are you going to answer my question there, David?
Yeah, I'm showing the this course that just came out that I'm listening to now on the Big Bang.
Okay, are you going to share your thingy? I just have to switch whichever one it's on.
No, I don't need to
do
switch.
that.
I'm just going to put the link in the chat. Teaching company.
Hey, David, nice to see you.
Whoa. Gary Felder of Smith College. So, really, the evidence for the Big Bang, like we talked about the James Webb Telescope at the beginning, is largely predictions of what should be observed, and then observation of, in terms of mostly background radiation levels or various things that could be measured, certain signals or information coming from the galaxy. So almost all of the, so to say, proof of the Big Bang.
How does that establish the Big Bang?
Well, I mean, it's kind of like evolution. It doesn't establish the Big Bang, but there were predictions based on the model that they said if the Big Bang happened, we should observe these things in the universe, and then those things were observed. And even the idea behind the James Webb Telescope is to measure certain radiation, certain wave forms that will be coming in to our galaxy, and then there's the predictions in the Big Bang model that if the Big Bang happened, then we should observe these things. So as far as my understanding, it's kind of like evolution. So that's really the only
kind of weird, because there's like background noise on every machine. So it seems like there'd be background noise everywhere. So there being background noise, aka like near uniform UBM, to me that is just establishing that there's a background noise, like signal to noise ratio. Every single machine I've ever seen has some type of effective SNR.
Yeah, but the
universe functions on a machine-like basis. Why wouldn't it also have an SNR? So I never found that particularly compelling. But I would say the finite ages that we observe are actually the most compelling for a finite. Let's forget about a Big Bang. Let's talk about a finite aged universe, just with controversy about that mechanism aside. To simplify the problem, is there actually an inherent problem with a created universe?
Again?
I just said, is there an inherent problem with a created universe?
And logically?
I'm not sure if logically is the right word, or frame-wise, or what.
The Big Bang is largely based on mathematical models, and it, came out in the 70s, and then it wasn't that popular, and it sold to Einstein and the God playing dice and the expanding universe, and so there were two precipices to the Big Bang. There were theories in quantum mechanics that certain elements of the evidence didn't match the original theories, and then there was the observation of background I think called radiation, in that it basically came in an equal amount from all levels. And then, like in the 70s, there was actually formalized mathematical theory of the Big Bang that somewhat corresponded with quantum theory and the unification of the
weak in electromagnetic forces or something like that, based on temperature, and then more mathematical models, and then more looking into space for background radiation, and some of those possibly corresponding with what the models predicted. Uh, so it's relatively theoretical. It's like the discovery of the Higgs boson could be considered in line with the Big Bang. Certain particles that isn't necessarily directly connected to the Big Bang, but like relatively, even like the discovery of the Higgs boson, to most physicists, is in line with the Big Bang theory. And I think it was the equations from the Big Bang that predicted that this particle would exist in the concept of the extreme heat uh, at the beginning of the universe. So if you're talking like a logical, uh, mathematical, it'd be hard even to say how could you prove something that happened in the past, like evolution. And so what type of predictions, if it explanatory power. So it's more a question of explanatory power and a minor level of predictions, and then you have the level of the pure logic behind it, of from a philosophical basis, and then also the mathematical logic of predictions, where you could have some sort of mathematical model that if it happened according to these equations, and then these equations, uh, I would say, predict, if you want to use that word, but if you work out the equations would predict that the uh, universe would be in this current state. That's why I said to T jump about how do you prove science. So there's predictions of the future, and then there's predictions about the present. And actually, a large amount of science isn't about predictions of the future, it's about predictions of the present, because we have a lot of information about the present. So if your model predicts what it was in the past, and then you could test the model based on the present. So that's kind of the nature of evolution, and also of the Big Bang. You can't really test evolution for what's going to happen for the future, but you could test evolution based on the present, and say that, okay, here's the present, and does the model of evolution or the Big Bang predict the present, and then examine the model up against what we currently observe in the present.
Mm-hmm. So how's the course going?
I actually restarted. I listened in 2 speed, and I listened to like the first 9 lectures, and I decided to restart it. So I'm back, I think, in lecture 3. I mean, it's like an exercise in chunking theory, to actually work out the equations. And a lot of stuff is very complicated. So like there's one story about Euler equations, and that these 2 scientists were, just randomly reviewing Euler, and then I'm looking for an article on that to see it exactly. But then this theory that Euler had figured out, 200 some years ago, actually explained and observed the quantum phenomenon. So like there's a history, there's the names involved, there's the theories, and then there's the more complicated actual mathematics, and which are to some extent require the pinnacle of human knowledge to understand the level of mathematics necessary to so to say model the Big Bang. And then even like Sabine Hassenfelder, or quantum holographic, various things. So you could understand it logical philosophically, but then actually to be conversant with the calculations and the equations is really the true level of understanding, because most of the theories are computative and equation based.
Right. It's based on a singularity, right? So it's a contradiction.
Well, I don't think there's not really one unified Big Bang theory. There's multiple Big Bang theories, and even the origin. Some of these concepts that you hear a lot about, like the first, the first few seconds, the first few minutes, and the origins of the particles, um, don't all have to conceptually start with like a singularity, like an infinite mass singularity. Although most of them do, and the relationship to quantum mechanics, because the unification of is it the weak and electromagnetic or the strong and weak nuclear forces, basically saying they're one and the same, and they differentiate at a temperature range, and possibly in stars that this occurs. So that's one of the observation points. So if you're saying that these forces, that there is these fundamental scientific laws of electromagnetism, then there's a strong and weak force of the nucleus, and that a certain temperature range that well, I'm guessing from what they say that the force the force is really one and the same, and that a certain temperature or distance range the force is manifested uh, differently. And so in stars you might have this phenomenon, and then we could observe it through the waves that are emitted from the stars, or in the Big Bang, where you would have had this massive plasma, with extremely high speeds. That
Well, what
would have
happens when there's a contradiction is something called the truth explosion. So you have to bind the truth explosion by saying, well, there's really only any significant expansion in the first negative 36 to negative 33 seconds. I mean, is that reasonable?
well, I don't know if it's reasonable. I mean, reasonable according to logic,
Well,
reasonable
that
according to
thing says there's only 7 levels of precision that are significant and per measurement. And I don't exactly know how he said it, but he said something to that effect.
there's certain elements of so there's a relationship to the Big Bang and current quantum theory, because the understanding of
I would not go that far, honestly. I wouldn't. I'd say closer relationship to general relativity than quantum theory.
I think it's more quantum theory, because you're talking about the unification of forces and extreme heat, and even like particle accelerators like the Higgs boson, where the prediction that this particle existed. And so there's a whole bunch of understanding what does it even mean, these particles, and there's temporary stability points, and some things may be understood to have permanent stability, um, or a stability factor like half-lives, uh, but there's a whole plethora of potential particles that have levels of stability, time levels, half-lives of stability, and so to say, predict them, the point of the particle accelerators, to create these extremely high heat and high acceleration cases that would create these particles. And then largely from like a extrapolation from a scaling effect, to say what would have it looked like from the Big Bang. But to say that what happens in the particle accelerator scaled is the predictions of the Big Bang. But it's not really like say it's a history lesson. It's Big Bang is like evolution. Is that provable? It's more a theory that has explanatory power, and at this point, it's like evolution, that the majority of physicists believe that the Big Bang is the dominant theory with the most explanatory power, and there's a series of predictions and explanatory power that it has that is the reason for that.
Yeah, and I guess the thing that it's explaining is transition from a higher energy to lower energy state, which is the vast majority of what we observe. There's a bit of a challenge with having time as a prime cause, because there's no source of motion. I'm just pulling up an image here I thought would be helpful. Do you
I
think
it's
there's
also the electroweak interaction.
Okay. What do you mean?
The unification of the electroweak of the electromagnetic and weak force.
Okay. Do you see an inherent problem with infinite regress?
I mean, you're familiar with that?
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, if we're gonna have a grand unified field theory, it's got to account for everything we're calling forces right now. Of course, yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Well, I'm saying that's generally accepted is the unification of the electromagnetic and weak force, and saying that that's related to that the quantum model and the Big Bang.
Okay. Do you think there's an intrinsic problem in infinite regress?
Like the cosmological problem?
Well, there's this principle of sufficient reason idea that gets trotted out a lot, and I've heard many claim that IR, aka infinite regress, isn't really that much of an issue from a conceptual perspective. I just want to know if you had an opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, you need multiple truth hypotheses. You need axioms of logic, and how you define the axioms of logic may or may not give rise to a problem of infinite regress, which is related to the cosmological argument of the first mover.
That didn't sound anything like an opinion. That was a description. You're saying you don't have an opinion on the infinite regress problem.
I don't really have any opinions, period. Multiple truth hypothesis saying that said that infinite regress is more or less problematic depending on how you define your axioms. So, I mean, my opinion is like for what axioms I preference for. But I don't really have opinions like that to prefer axioms over the other. I'm more willing to accept the uncertainty.
Okay. I just want to go into that idea. I've got something screen shared here, the diagram. I don't want to go to the actual website. It's extremely weird. Personal ad on it. Do you see what I'm displaying on the top right? I don't want to click it because I tried to click it before.
I might say the space-time singularity is a breakdown of space-time. I don't see anything on the top right. I just see your article. No,
I just shared it. It's two types of infinite regress models. One is isomorphic to the naturals, and one is
like dominoes,
finite.
one line in one circle.
Yeah, the idea is like they could both be a model for infinite regress. It's like one is a sort of finite infinitism, and the other one's an infinite infinitism.
Yeah, so it depends on how you define your axiom. So it's traversing the same circle over and over again, infinite, or a line. That's what I said the other day, in terms of complex space versus infinity. That you could define infinity within, just like a line going out forever, which is also debated. That you say like many theories of the Big Bang or the universe is that there is no such thing as a line going out forever, that a line going out forever will get you back to the same point. But if you had theoretically but yeah, I mean, we're arguing about this last week.
I guess the only thing I wanted to say was how happy I was I found that image that juxtaposes finite infinity and infinite infinity.
Even that was what I meant last week when I said the complex. You could mathematically make a complex plane for mathematical purposes, but complex numbers have no geometric meaning. And just by putting it on a Cartesian coordinate system or something like that to give it meaning, but that's not its actual geometric meaning, as where infinity could have physical meaning.
Yeah, it's a tough question. I guess I was gonna say maybe the one on the left is a bit easier to conceive of than the one on the right.
Well, I'm not
It's
sure as an
finite one.
object of mind.
Yeah.
I mean, to conceive or to visualize.
Oh, in my mind, those are the same thing. How would you distinguish those?
Well, I'm saying I think I could conceive of a line that extends forever. I can't visualize it.
Oh,
they're,
I
they're
see. I
different. You
see.
could
Like a
conceive,
hypothetical versus an actual state of mind. I see. Okay.
and if you want to say like, can you conceive of impossibilities like the philosophers, like the pink elephants, or if you say complex numbers are inconceivable, that you could create some sort of geometric representation in terms for how to work with the mathematical reality of complex numbers, but complex numbers are by definition inconceivable, uh, or in not only they're not visualizable, but they're inconceivable. So when you visualize like a complex plane, that's not an accurate conception of what it actually is. It's just a tool for working the mathematics of it. But yeah, I mean, you could conceive of impossible things. I mean, that's a question. Can you conceive of impossible things? You could conceive of things that don't exist, like pink elephants, and that's like possible arguments for the spiritual realm that if I could conceive of a pink elephant, but pink elephants don't exist, where does the pink elephant reside? It resides in my mind, but because it resides in my mind, does there have to be an actual reality? And so these are actually philosophical debates that require axioms that where there's high amounts of uncertainty.
Yeah.
And if you think visualization versus conception, that they're similar but not necessarily the same. And then can you conceive of things that you can't visualize? And so like electromagnetism, that you might visualize, like have the visual things that are done in school to help us understand it, like the dual sine wave going out in different dimensions, or like Kirchhoff drawings, electrical circuits, but you can't visualize electricity. You could visualize mathematical representations that help us understand the phenomena of electricity or magnetism. Like you could draw a magnetic polarity map that shows the force lines for magnetism, but magnetism itself is something that can't be visualized, although it could be conceived.
Well, for some of those effects, I'd argue you don't know whether they can be visualized.
You could visualize
to what
the geometry
extent?
of their forces. So like electromagnetism, you could visualize the geometric conception of their forces, but you can't actually visualize electricity or magnetism. You could just visualize the geometric representation of their
Again,
forces.
you can't speak to whether you can visualize and what. You're just saying that the geometry math representation isn't the same as the actual thing. That's true. That's all you can really say out of that, though. I saw this video. Did you watch any of that where it was queued up about the emptiness? I don't know how.
I just watched a few seconds. You just shared that.
Yeah, I took like a huge amount of notes on it. You weren't interested, I guess?
Well, you just shared it with me like an hour before we started, and I was doing something else.
Oh, I didn't see it until just then. That's yeah, no problem.
It's like an hour video with no
It
just
wasn't. I
bullets.
didn't want to watch the full video. It was just one segment of it.
Yeah, I watched that minute part on emptiness, and you know, I don't know if it was like Chinese Buddhism or your view towards you know, even a mathematical philosophical question of emptiness versus like a Kabbalistic or spiritual, and if that was some sort of, you know, not
How
Vedic,
does Kabbalism define emptiness? Can you share that at all? If it's not counterproductive.
well, that's the statement in terms of Kabbalah of how God created the universe, that the first thing God did was made a void, where, you know, in theory, God is everything, God is everywhere. So the first thing that God did in order to make creation was to create a void that we'll call emptiness, and then the, you know, the symptom of production processes like God's infinite light. So in theory, God's infinite light was everywhere. So the first step was creating a void or empty space where God's present wasn't, and then to, you use this process they call like Simpson contractions of allowing God's light in a processed contracted form into this empty space. So that's the, you know, the conception, the basic Kabbalistic conception of how we were created, how we have free will, is that in you know, how you know, the unity, that there's only one God, God is everything, that the first thing God did was to create a void, you know, so to say, emptiness.
So that's in some sense.
The what?
Well, I'm trying to find the right words to express what I'm trying to say, like that it's a primitive, a metaphysical primitive, or a beginning point to reasoning in some type of pursuit.
Well, it's logical, because the monotheism's the underlying logical principle. So the assumption is, you know, God is everything, God is everywhere. And so how do you get creation, which is, you know, like us, these distinct units with free will, is that the first step is there has to be the creation of emptiness or nothing. So most of the Kabbalistic models, the first thing that God does is create emptiness.
So it's part of the fundamental model of universal creation in the Kabbalah.
And it has a, yeah, it has like a terminology where God removed himself from himself.
Okay.
And then you have the, you know, the understanding of the Simpson, the contractions, that God's infinite divine light is shaded, like kind of like Plato's forms, into the material realm. And but the first thing that had to be done was for God to remove himself from a certain area, and that would be the space that would you know, allow for the material creation. But you can't have the material creation till you have, so to say, an emptiness, and emptiness needed to be created, because before the emptiness was created, all you had was God, and God was, you know, permeating everywhere.
A fundamental non-dualism, perhaps.
That's the Arizal. There might be a few different conceptions of the Kabbalah, but you know, it's kind of interesting to look like emptiness is a creation, and from that you know, concept. And the reason that it's brought out that way is because the underlying axiom is monotheism. That you know, why the first creation has to be emptiness is because of this kind of incontrovertible axiom of monotheism, that that implies that there can't be two, and therefore emptiness had to have been created. And, like, so to say, our individuality from God is an illusion, and you know, there is only God, but God created an emptiness and then allowed us to you know, be in that void of where God is, that creates the illusion like we are our own separate entity.
Are you trying? Okay. Would you confirm that this particular teaching is some form of solipsism?
No, I don't answer it stops. No, I mean it's. I mean,
Well, you're saying everyone's an instantiation of some higher mind, or how did you put that exactly?
well, yeah, we are. The word in Hebrew, the Kabbalah uses the concept of tzimtzum, that of contractions. So if you look at him, and there's more beyond this, but you call the Ein Sof is the no end that refers to like God, the unknowable, where in this form we have no knowledge of, and then there's the Or Ein Sof, the light. Ein Sof means just no end, and then you have the light of the no end. So the first step of creation is creating a void, and then within that void, the light contracts. God's infinite light contracts into the void, and so to say we're an aspect of, if you want to call it divine mind or divine light, that's been went through like an infinite set of regressions, or maybe not infinite, a finite set of regressions to to allow the God's light to be shaded enough that it could appear that we're our own unique separate being. And so it's trying to saying the main logical principle that the Kabbalists want to reject is monotheism, and to say that in answer, so how do we have free will, or how do we exist if there's only one thing and that's only God? So it uses this concept of the created void and then the contracted light. It doesn't really use the concept mind, more uses the concept of light, but you could look at it possibly in terms of mind.
Yeah, that's almost semantic. That's why I try to focus on the process rather than the terminology. Like process first and then labels second. Otherwise, you get into the problems of language that maybe this particular take on it could be helpful for resolving to some extent.
They use an onion model. So if you look, like, let's say you have infinite light everywhere, and then you have the creation of a circle, a void, a spherical void, that you have, God's infinite light everywhere besides for the spherical void where the light isn't. And then you have like the layers of an onion, possibly an infinite, but called like a finite regress of the light going layer through layer into the void. And so that's the created world, that's us, is the result of these regressions of the infinite light entering this temporary void that God created. So that's the template of what Kabbalah exists in, is the theoretical infinite, everything is just God's infinite light, and then you have like the sphere of empty space that's created, and then from that sphere of empty space that's created, light is contracted over and over again into the sphere to lead to what we're part of here in the universe.
Cool.
And
yeah,
that's the basic Kabbalistic model and thing. So the first step is this spherical void, and once you have the spherical void, then you have the infinite regress of light entering the spherical void.
Are you sure you don't mean the infinite permutations of light, not regress? If you're starting with a void, you can't regress backwards into it.
But contractions, Simpsons, the infinite contractions. I mean to say that you have infinite light, and so that however it's possible that God sustains the spherical void, so to say, within himself, that in order that there could be empty space, but at the same time light penetrating into it, there's this infinite process, so possibly finite process of
contractions. That the infinite light goes through a severe contraction level, and then from there it goes through stages and stages of contractions, and that's the material realm, everything in the material realm and spiritual realm. So that, the spiritual realm is the contracted form of so the contracted forms eventually start with the spiritual realm and then reach to the material realm. And so the spiritual realm is a severely contracted form of God's infinite light, and then the material realm is even more contracted form of God's life. So the spiritual realm is part of the void also, so that the sphere that God empties out and then the light starts entering into is the beginning of the spiritual realm, and then it's contracted more in the material realm.
I'm sorry, you just cut out at the end. Could you repeat like the last 10 seconds?
Yeah, so you have this spherical void in the infinitude of God. If you wanted to put in spatial understanding, God's infinite, going in all directions, just pure infinite infinity, all powerful light. You use the light metaphor, and then God contracts a spherical shape of void. And if you use the metaphor like layers of an onion, that God starts contracting this infinite light to let it into the void. And so the first stages of the light that's let into the void, like the outer shells of the layer of the onion, are the spiritual realms. And that light went through a huge amount of contractions. And at a certain point, the contractions, the initial contractions, we'll call those the spiritual realm. And then eventually, after enough contractions, that becomes the physical realm.
Nice one. Can I read from my textbook what about ether, which is how I came to understand this emptiness tech? It's a medical textbook. It's very short.
Okay.
Did you want to take a break or something? Because that'd be cool too. I can just play like a clip or something if you want to take a 5-minute break or something.
Okay, yeah, I'm listening.
Okay. Let's go with this. Reading from Book of the Prophet of Saint Lad. MASC. Don't ask me what that means. All right. Ether is called Kash in Sanskrit, is a mystic word. It means all-enclosing, all-pervading, omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. All-pervading ether serves as the common factor or home for all objects in the universe. Ether, which is the first expression of consciousness, is the basic need of the bodily cells. In the development of matter, ether comes first. Ether is expansive, empty, and has no resistance. Ether provides freedom in which to move. Without ether, there is no love or freedom. Ayurveda holds that within ether there is a pure presence or of spiritual energy that manifests as nuclear energy. I'm going to go ahead and just say the nuclear energy thing. I don't think that's a thing. That's not, I don't think that's what I don't know that that's a traditional interpretation. I'm not denying that nuclear energy is a thing. Denying that this is a traditional interpretation of ether. So the gunas of ether, those are the qualities. That's clear, light, subtle, soft, and immeasurable. So why is it immeasurable? Well, to suspect by now, it's the ground of measurement. You can't measure the ground of measurement. Its actions or karmas are vibration, expansion, non-resistance, freedom, love, descent of intelligence into the heart of matter. All right. So that's all I wanted to talk about there. And then there is some allusion to the notion of recursive recombinance, what have you, to generate the other elements, but I'm very sort of dubious as to the point of going into this type of idea. I'll just think about it for a little bit. And in the meantime, let's see if I can get out something to listen to. All right. Okay, I just muted it. Hey, sorry about that. Doooovid, are you there?
What?
Yeah, I just had to step away for a second and get a drink, and I came back and I had this ASMR thing, but I had it muted. So anyway, I'm back. And if you were talking, nobody could hear you. I'm sorry about that. I just thought you weren't going to be back for like 5 minutes. So I figured I didn't know what else to say other than just that quick paragraph. Because I didn't want to conclude the topic, jump something else, and have to come back to it later because I had a whole bunch of notes on that video there. But we can just wait till next week, I guess, if you haven't watched any of it or don't have any more comments. Because I was trying to get through it and it was dense. Yeah, tracking the meaning of that was extremely challenging. Hello? Are you there? Did you hear what I said about ether? Have you ever read about this stuff? Probably not.
Well, I mean, we talk about ether all the time. We talk about Mickelson, Morley, and I mean, if you're looking at like a Chinese perspective, yeah, I don't know if it's
Sure.
or Eastern. I don't know if it's
Thank you.
Buddhist or Narganjuna. Yeah, I'm not
Well,
familiar.
Michelson Morley ether versus Ayurveda ether, not really the same type of framework, is it?
Well, ether's ether. I mean, Mickelson Morley was just an experiment to try to measure the ether. I mean, the concept of the ether is, kind of like a pan spiritual idea that's in many traditions that might have some permutations that might be different from, like a Kabbalistic or Eastern Western, and even to just metaphysical. That what the definition of space. So I wouldn't be surprised if Chinese wisdom has a different way of understanding that. That from the Vedas. I mean, so Buddhism is predicated on the Vedas, but it may it may, a lot of Buddhism has admixture of Chinese stuff into it, not just like Confucianism or philosophy or native Chinese religions, but other stuff also. So it's definitely a big subject.
Yeah, someone said it's been disproved in the chat. It's like a bunch of stuff's been disproved and nobody cared for a really long time. And people will continue not to care, I think.
Once we have the metaphysics, and then you have the the logic and what you could actually measure.
Well, I don't think people believe the claims of Ayurveda. Yeah. So I don't know. People
it's
are
more
dead
a belief
set
system
on
than a. I mean, because it's more a revealed truth from authority than something derived from experiment. So I mean, you could take, like I said, ether. So there's an understanding of an ether, just that it was presumed, not because like there's an understanding of ether because it was in the sages has talked about it, and you had received traditions in the West that talked about ether, so it was assumed. And then there was a pure metaphysical understanding where just the great minds, including philosophical and scientific, just assumed that there had to be an ether because it made sense. So even like the Galen and the Platonic solids, or the four earth, wind, fire, and water, and ether. So that's basically the same in the East and the West. And if you want to look like possibly a unifying origin, or if Eastern and Western traditions came onto this conception, parallel, unconnected forms. But yeah, I mean, the concept of an ether was largely scientific till it wasn't scientific anymore, and that was largely from experiment. And even to like even till this day, that you could say ether is logical. Like what whole
it's a fucking model. It's not supposed to represent reality. It's supposed to correct for reality. It's a medical model, for fuck's sake.
We have like the four humors, and
exactly. It's like that fails because of Ayurveda. It's like hilarious.
Well, Ayurveda has similar things to that, though.
Similar how?
By saying it's a revealed tradition, it's not based on the scientific method. So if you're saying that they start
scientific what you're calling scientific method is also based on revealed tradition.
Well, I mean, you could argue that, but like not according to the propagators of the scientific method.
No one wants to think that they're fanatics.
But I mean, just simple that say you could, it's like T-jump was, you're saying like, the people in the past didn't know much, what they thought was largely irrelevant. And when you have certain either philosophical or technological basis that allows a larger understanding, so obviously how people thought about things in the past, like the IC3 was asking on Ralph about if I thought there'd be a rise in religion. And I said, yeah, because a failure of the elites to explain things, and so people will turn. People need explanations, and so if they see the answers the elites are giving are incorrect, they'll turn to alternative places for answers. So I mean, that's your generic understanding that in the past, people did the best with what they knew to come up with answers. The anthropological explanation.
The age of an idea, in theory, should it necessarily have any bearing on its truth? Like, I'm trying to be generous to my opposition here.
Well, I mean, T-Jump is saying is opposite, that most old ideas are wrong. I mean, as a traditionalist, I would say, like, no, the age. I mean, I argued about that with T-Jump for tens of minutes, but like, no, he was like, most old ideas are wrong.
Here's one thing I want to just mention about this whole thing is about a model being disproven. Calculus is disproven by physics, and we still use it. Why? Because it's a fucking model and it works for what it's meant to do. And this is the same with the ether model. Saying you disproved ether using science is just misunderstanding what it actually is, which is part of another type of science. Arguably, you could argue it's medicine too. I mean, whatever. Semantics.
You already say that ether has no visible.
There's no like
consequences.
Fire in the body,
no measurable
literally.
Consequences.
No, I'm saying that if you go out to try to find ether, you're not going to find it because it's a model compressing the information in the quantum periodic table. Like it's another elemental model.
I mean, like the Michelson-Morley to measure it.
It's not going to be measurable. Like it's because it's a model. Like there's only one of those that's actually going to be measurable, and it's the periodic table.
Well, I mean, like if a T-Jumpian view, it's saying ether is just an unnecessary axiom.
So then he has to derive all the same mysticism as ether, and he doesn't. So it means he doesn't have any idea what it even entails. So it's like his opinion is not worth anything.
He's saying it's an unnecessary axiom, so he just dumped it.
So fine, that's on burden of proof is on him because he hasn't replicated the mysticism associated with the concept. It's like he says that, because they can electrocute the brains of mice, that means that the consciousness arises from the brain. It's like, no, until you can induce every mind state by specific probing the brain, you haven't established that. And I wouldn't recommend trying to establish it either. Sounds pretty rough, pretty unethical, if you ask me. I don't think my point got across, though. Like, it's a chunker the same way the periodic table is a chunker. It subdivides a space-time event into a partition function that has a certain cardinality, a very low cardinality on one end, and a relatively high cardinality indicating the number of microstates associated with the small number of plurality, like 4 and 118 with a periodic table. That was what I thought was the most important part of what I was talking about yesterday with memes. But yeah, the fact that the periodic table works means that the Ayurvedic doshas, including ether, can't be observed scientifically because they are the basis of a science. It's like the whole proving an axiom thing again. It's a misunderstanding of the misframing the question. I don't know that anybody is necessarily following that, so we can go on to another topic. But yeah, interesting stuff. Like, did that make any sense? The counting principle that like there's a ratio between 118 to 4 that's transcendent, a transcendent sort of principle. No? Are you there, Doooovid?
Yeah, I'm here.
So no answer there, nothing?
I'm not sure.
Well, you're talking about chunking all the time, and this is the chunking. It's 4 into 118 is some type of it's a 2-layer chunking process. There's like a division into 4 and then a simulation into 118. Whereas with the Ayurvedic stuff, it would be a division into 5 and then a simulation into what have you. I have no clue, what it would end up being. The answers already all exist, though, I'm sure. So I was also looking at the Trinity. People debate the Trinity so much. Have we really talked about that at all?
Was it Christian Trinity?
Just the idea of a Trinity. I know I've brought up the 3 pi e being closely related in terms of numbers, but I guess the Trinity is a theological concept. We go into that, like with the Trimurti and stuff like that, with the Hindu concept.
Yeah, I mean, like the Brahma, Shiva, Vishnu, Rama, Vishnu, Shiva.
Yeah, like whether that is a Trinity. Because there's a bunch of Trinities in Ayurveda too. There's the doshas and the gunas and everything. So I should actually calculate that number to see how close it is to 118. Anyway, haven't done that yet. But yeah, essentially what this is all coming down to is the difficulty in modeling infinite motion. And I guess what we're doing right now is a literature review in some sense of various models of infinite motion and their potential issues. So I guess is ether a viable model for infinite motion? Would be the next question I would be inclined to ask. Any thoughts?
I'm good. Go for it.
What do you mean? Making a unified field model based on ether?
Well, I mean, create a model. Go for it.
I don't think a singular model would work. Because at some point, I think it would not be it would be de facto non-singular at some point if it was going to start to make meaningful observations. So I don't know that I would want to defend that model. Did we get into the question of whether redshift is the best evidence for the Big Bang? Or we didn't really? I guess we kind of concluded that you didn't have an opinion on that.
Yeah, I wasn't using the analogy redshift, but if I thought about it, I would. But yeah, we would say that's a prediction and explanatory power of an observed phenomenon. It's the best one. There's like a truth discovery function. I'm not even sure if it's the strongest.
Like the way I'm looking at it is basically conceptually what's the best evidence of creation, i.e. a beginning of time. And that's the fact that there's a finitude of time in the sense that there appears to be a maximum age that a solar system can be measured as, which is around 13 billion years. That, to me, is the best evidence for the Big Bang. Because they're both what you would expect if the universe was a finite age. I suppose the next best one would be expansion. What we're calling expansion, which is this redshifting thing. And then it's a question of, well, are we actually observing expansion, or is it look like expansion somewhere, but there's actually like we're recouping contractions somewhere else? And that would almost require you to like measure the boundary of the observable universe, which then I'm not sure if we can actually isolate. So there may be a limit there. Anyway, yeah. You're not talking? Do you have anything else you want to talk about, or do you want to wrap it up? Like, what do you think? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I'm speaking about chunking there. And Zobito was talking about racism, and so it's like you got to define it, and it's a complicated topic because your racism has kind of became like a no-no of like a social ill or stand in for mistreating people as opposed to a breakdown. So just in terms of the mind, I was trying to say I didn't have a chance because it was a big panel and everyone was talking over each other, but just to recognize patterns that they're different people who belong to different groups that they call, so to say, races. You could call that the precursor to racism, because you could say that that isn't necessarily true. There aren't actually, different groups. So just by grouping and say, oh, you're from this group and I'm from this group, or these people are from this group, without any attached meaning to it, just saying that the recognition of groups, is like the first stage. And then there's a stage of attaching characteristics and attributes to it that say, okay, these persons from this group and these people are from this group, I'm from this group, and so on and so on. And there's certain characteristics that go together with these groups that, like, such and such groups behave in more or less of certain ways. And then there could be a consequence of that pattern. There's, okay, there are these groups and these people are members of such and such groups and have certain behavioral patterns associated to the membership in those groups, and therefore consequences. And then if you had some sort of government or policy where you have state recognized groups, where the state recognizes these groups exist, and then the state treats groups in different ways, then you have like institutionalized racism. You could have legalized racism. You could have apartheid. You could have God forbid, genocide, or any of these things. On a personal level, you could just have treating people differently, and so like racism, to say as a pejorative, isn't necessarily, because you say, okay, it's good to treat people according to the way that the
Let's not start touting the virtues of let's be careful that I wish almost wish you'd stay off this topic entirely, because you're not able to. This is why Charles doesn't want to be on YouTube with you anymore. So you say these things and it's like, I know you're not, trying to be like putting the channel in trouble here, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not even trying to be edgy. I'm just
I know.
treat people the way according that they want.
And then you're into a domain of like, well, how much can you mind read someone's alleged preferences, and how much of that is typecasting? And then it's like, well, it's a bit of a fallacy to think you can mind. It's a bit of a fallacy to think you can mind read what's best for people.
We use simple examples. So I'm saying, like, God forbid, like,
I don't think we should continue this.
Racism's
I think you should talk about this on your own channel, frankly. I don't know how to contribute to this discussion meaningfully, and I'm just going to get upset because I'm going to think it's going to put the channel in danger, and I'm not even going to know what is going to be that gets said that's the problem here. So can we please talk about something else that's not racism?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was trying to talk about it last night on Zobitas, and it came into I mean, it was already contentious because you had people yelling at each other from, so I was almost from the group of reason, trying to be a point of reason, or get people to define terms or understand exactly the phenomenon.
Defining terms antagonizes people sometimes. Insisting on defining terms, it's really, you're on the clock until someone says you're being overly pedantic. And how do you defend against that? So I'm unsurprised. So how did it go badly, or was it just like more of a dumpster fire that you were on the edge of?
I was doing something else, so like I hardly spoke. I spoke a tiny bit, and other people were basically speaking. I was doing something else, so I was just on the panel. And then you at the very end of the stream, like, eventually, like
2 hours later, everyone left, and it was just me and Zobita, and we spoke a little bit about streaming, but like a little bit on the panel. So I would just the topic was about racism, and then there were so to say blacks on the panel, or African Americans. I mean, it's based in London, and so they're talking about can blacks be racist, or if it's institutionalized critical race theory. And I mentioned God forbid black on Jewish violence. Can you say there's a trend that like God forbid Jews get beat up pretty regularly, and there's another group of people that is usually the one beating us up.
And I just said I didn't want to talk about this, and you're doubling down now.
Well, you asked what we were talking, so that was
just basic. Like, okay, cool, but we could talk about it on your own channel if you want to.
You really just asked me
that much, right?
So,
okay, so any other streams going on this week?
Yeah, I have a chess stream, I think, on Tuesday. Another YouTuber that plays this variant with horde chess, where one side has a whole bunch of pawns, the other side has the pieces. So that should be interesting. Maybe talk about chunking theory. This guy's did a lot of work, a lot of study, and gotten pretty good at the game. So more chess. I'll put his YouTube link in the chat. He only has 36 subs, but I think I've showed a video of him. I think he did a video of a game we played, but I think Tuesday 1 o'clock I plan on talking with him. So yeah, I guess that's about it. I don't have too much streaming. Streaming is pretty tough. Saying like censorship or platform, politically provoked. Got off the YouTube. They opened up. I left their Discord. It looked like they're moving kind of like Groiper stuff, and it's kind of I didn't really see much progress there, and their debates aren't they're not even really having debates anymore. They're just having like streams. I think they have a debate now, but it's not. They moved away from like the modern day debate, like intellectual topic debates. So unlikely it's this current state of streaming. Don't have too many plans. I'd reached out to 3 people. One of them didn't respond from the although I still haven't finished the textbook of the Grossbergian neuroscience. So I haven't reached out to anyone else to stream. I saw Arjun from Theology Unleashed hasn't streamed in over a month. So it's possible that I'm also waiting to get a new computer. That I've been waiting. God forbid I can't get this part for my car, but hopefully finally early this week I should get it. So I might even buy the MacBook this week. It's possible if I get my car, and then I might even get the MacBook this week, and then maybe I'll start reaching out to people for interviews or streams. Yeah, it's unlikely that I would probably, besides for like interview topical ones, to just talk about something like Ralph or Zobita, and even controversial ideas. I mean, Charles wants to do back on YouTube. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to do. I thought it was probably a better idea he just gives up on YouTube, and we could just talk about more controversial things without the censoring. That would probably be better. But I guess he's went back on YouTube this week. But I would have to see, like, it's unlikely I have that much to stream that I would consider doing alternative platforms just to have controversial conversations. Although I would start making like Ask the Rabbis and maybe presentations if I get a new computer, maybe upgrade the technology. Then maybe I'll do some more informative educational content. I'll continue the multiple truth hypothesis, some Ask the Rabbis, maybe some more stuff on consciousness or science. So we'll see that, that I'm going to wait till I get the new computer to do that. So I guess that's about it. You want to wrap up? Ralph had the few streams this week. He might also be moving away from these kind of dumpster fires to talking more about computers, artificial intelligence, programming, which I would probably like that more. Like I don't mind talking about just computer programming and artificial intelligence. And he's a chess player, so that might be a little bit more interesting than just like the same people with the same basically race, kind of like politically provoked. Like the main topic is race.
For the third time, I don't want to talk about this on the channel. But yes, I get it. It sucks to be constantly brought into topic about race and why I don't want to fucking talk about it on the channel. Great. Don't talk about it on this channel then, because it just stresses me out because I don't know where the line is in terms of commentary, okay? Please.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying that it's unlikely.
I don't want to hear an explanation. I just want to move on to another topic.
Okay, yeah, I don't have another topic. So we could wrap up.
I have been doing a lot of research. I haven't actually put a new article out. I want to, because like the last 2 articles I wrote were actually not even the topic. There was originally the article I started writing about it. I realized that I needed these extra explanations sort of referred to almost as a given in the explanation I originally wanted to give. And I realized that there's finally some research that's published that talks about doping images with like some type of simulated noise for more robust machine learning, and they actually seem to have a pretty impressive improvement. At least for one of the data sets was 24%. Now that is almost like, I don't know if anybody can even say why this is the case, but if this is, I'm not saying that I can validate these results necessarily, but if this is the case, it's impressive. What do you think about that? Adding noise to images actually making the resulting training data more accurate? Because it's almost like taking the same image and replicating it 30 times and then dividing it by 30 as some sort of an averaging process. That doesn't work. But somehow adding noise to images and then, I guess, training on a huge set of images improves machine learning accuracy by, according to this, 24%. So I don't know if you wanted to. I'm sorry I didn't send you this article because it was in relation to an article I hadn't finished on my blog yet. So, but did you have any? I don't know if you wanted to mention any thoughts about this or what.
I mean, it's probably if you just give a comparison to like if I were trying to, acquire expertise for doing something, and why adding noise to an image, and you say maybe because it's more difficult. That adding noise to images makes the computer focus in a certain way because it's a more difficult task, and therefore figures out a better solution or method, or if it's like contrast and differences that
wait, you're saying the computer's trying harder, like it has an intentionality almost? I'm sorry, I didn't follow that.
Well, no, I mean even to anthropomorphize the computer, but in terms of I mean image, like trying to decipher useful information from the image and determining what's useful from the image and what's not, and somehow adding noise that makes the task more difficult, causes the computer to find a better solution because it's a more difficult task. In the contrast detection, that it's conceivable. I mean,
that's so interesting. I never thought of that as the reason.
I mean, it's just like, okay, if you were training at something like target practice of some sort, and then you trained in bad weather conditions, or like Winter Olympics, or like something that you trained in bad weather conditions to improve your ability. That I mean, it's conceivable that you're just making the conditions worse allows the contrast detection to work better. And I'm not sure if it's only images with noise or they have both images.
So if you had an image without noise and the same image with noise, and if you compared it to like an audio task, if that's more your expertise, that why it
I
might
was an
help,
audio and video analyst, though.
like an audio task that background noise would be beneficial, and maybe that's saying that you're trying to contrast the useful information, so somehow background noise would so I'm not sure if you just gave the one with noise, or you gave some with noise, or the same one with noise and the same one without noise. I could see that being beneficial for altogether better algorithm for deciphering the useful information. So, sort of say, okay, if I could recognize Jennifer, in an open field with no noise, versus if I could recognize Jennifer in in the rain, in a storm, or in a crowd of like a big crowd like Where's Waldo, that might create some sort of better algorithm to having the ones with the noise. So that intuitively makes a little bit of sense.
I wonder if that's actually why.
Well, I don't know if you could actually tell. I mean, so
Well,
you have
because I'm thinking like the way they train the algos is convergence. So it's always finding the eigenvalues of the matrix. So they converge, and it's like, oh, it is so mysterious. Honestly, I'm not saying you're wrong. It's an interesting idea. I'm just not sure that that's the only possible explanation at this time.
Well, I'm just giving a parallel to of how I might go about something, why that might be useful for me. And so the AI algorithm, you don't necessarily know how it works. So you just say that that it worked, that whatever algorithm the computer used, it came up with better results in terms of detection or output when it was trained with noisy images. And I didn't read the article to see the exact studies, but no, I mean, we don't necessarily know the algorithm of how the computer does what it does. We just know that you could have the output, the result, and say that if a certain training set of data versus a different training set of data gave a different result. And so there's a little bit of the black box problem, is that you can't necessarily figure out how the computer did what it did. So just to give a parallel to like how I might go about a problem, and why like myself, like training data, that why I might achieve a better result having certain training data. And then if you actually wanted to examine an algorithm and see like, okay, no, there's different types of AI algorithms, and say the specific algorithm that the data that this machine learning algorithm is using, and why that would have produced better results given different training data.
Yeah, maybe I didn't read deep enough into it, because if they have the noise doped data plus the original data, that would explain why it was better. And I'm just assuming they only use noise doped data, but that is just my naivete, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm doubting that was the case. I mean, it's possible.
Now that I think about it more, it doesn't even seem reasonable to presume that. I guess that's all for this week. And I will continue working on what I was going to submit to Jason there.
Oh, we start putting stuff into writing.
I'm thinking about what it's going to take to do that. I haven't put anything to writing per se, but I'm going in the direction of working out kinks in the language would be required for such an endeavor to be successful.
Yeah, I read through some of those math books, and I've been reading a book on logic in the bathroom. I read the more slowly.
A bathroom logic book. Please tell us more.
Well, I almost always read with while doing other things. So I mean, you bathroom, I'm doing something else too. But like with the in the bathroom, that's the only time like I'm reading without lectures or something else in the background. But I'm pounding through different books, and yeah, but I think multiple truth theory will probably become in a logical form, and like I said, the truth discovery function of like a logical format where you have a binary of 0 or 1 for true or false, um, but it would be a discovery function where it's not a binary of 0 or 1, that it has an equity value somewhere between 0 and 1, and to actually formulate that of like a lot of machine learning algorithms also operate on a discovery function that creates values between 0 and 1. So reviewing my logical formulas, and just some books on mathematical logic textbooks, so that hopefully I'd be able to write it and articulate it in proper logical format.
You mean the multiple truth hypothesis or your chunking theory?
Multiple truth hypothesis. But I mean, chunking theory also, that it would be, I mean, chunking theory, there is, computer models of chunking theory that have been tested. I went over them on the stream, but it's more, chunking theory is more a generalized template for just understanding mental processes than an actual, sort of say statistical model or data centric. Although there have been attempts. I was thinking, like, music wise, I saw more, Smoking in the Boys Room. God forbid a Motley Crue song, but I was thinking, God forbid, the Beastie Boys. I remember when I was a kid, that line from their most popular song, there was like, but Pops caught me smoking and he said, no way, that hypocrite smokes 2 packs a day. So that was, for whatever reason, I didn't listen to that song actually for like over a decade, like decades, but I remember those lyrics very clearly when I was young. I think my father thought that, for whatever reason, my father thought that line was really funny. Like, my pops caught me smoking and he said, no way, that hypocrite smokes 2 packs a day. But yeah, God forbid, make use of the time. A lot of famous rabbis studied math in the, Vilna Gaon supposedly read math books in the bathroom. My father has said read math books, chess books in the bathroom. From a Judaic point of view, you're not allowed to, the bathroom's considered an impure, dirty place. So you're not supposed to think about God or holy thoughts in the bathroom because it's an impure place. And so,
So you figure thinking about logic, that will just stomp those thoughts of God right out?
Yeah, reading math and science has been like a mainstay for centuries of what rabbis do in the bathroom. So
Might have been a loss for words.
Theological basis, and I think my dad, whatever that, why, but okay, like, if you spend 5-10 minutes sitting on the throne a day, you could pound through a few books. You could pound through like a book every week or two, and maybe, God forbid, like, you think about difficult thoughts, like, God forbid, like, oh man, I'm full of shit, but because like, like, you see, like, I really don't understand these things, so you break your head to think about things that you didn't understand. So maybe like mathematical, logical puzzle books, like math and science, is a good thing to, like, God forbid, like, get the crap out of you. That recognition that like, you're not really that smart. Like all men are mortal. Socrates is Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. They say, like, like all men are mortal, that because 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 we're full of craps and take craps. So that's one of the the humble times where you're
using the restroom, it's a time of humility. So there might be a connection towards recognizing the limit of mind and the limit of human capacity, and trying to go back to studying basic math, logic, science, specifically math, not like science, but like formulas.
Well, what's the name of the book?
I have to go upstairs, but it's just it's a textbook in logic. I think it's designed to be like an upper undergraduate level textbook on logic, or maybe a graduate lower level uh, textbook on logic. And so I just got through like the first chapter where it's going over the definitions, and today I did the truth tables, and that's so I was mentioning the usually in logic truth is binary 0 or 1, but that doesn't have to be that way. So you could have logical representations where truth is not a binary 0 or 1, but has a uncertain value between 0 and 1. And it said like a lot of AI machine learning algorithms have truth functions like that, whose design who goal is to assign as accurate as possible the value of the truth somewhere between 0 and 1. And if that's the case of you're recognizing an object in a picture that's somewhat like a imperfect judgment, where you don't have a binary 0 or 1, you have a estimated value somewhere between 0 or 1, or you have an uncertainty where eventually the value will be a 0 or a 1, but it's temporarily. So if you had a picture in noise and you weren't sure if the information was useful or noise, you might temporarily assign it a value somewhere between 0 and 1. If you thought it was going to be useless, closer to 0. If you thought it was going to be valuable, closer to 1. And then on some sort of second run, second take, that you would keep on reassigning the value until in the final take it would get a definitive 0 or 1, or in some cases it might remain uncertain. So that is a common part of the learning machine learning algorithms, where they do multiple runs and they assign a value between 0 and 1, and then each run try to get a more accurate value, and then at the end where they so to say pump out a solution, that they will finally assess whether to give it a binary value of 0 or 1. I'm not sure if you're familiar with what I'm talking about, or if it intuitively makes sense.
It's the Bayesian approach, it sounds like. Not sure if you
Well,
described
Bayesian is just one mathematical method. I was saying, like, most machine learning algorithms have a truth discovery function that may or may not be Bayesian. Bayesian is the most popular one, but it doesn't have to be Bayesian. But it's saying that you were talking about noise in the picture. So the point is, they're trying to figure out useful information, and that's going to be a binary of 0 or 1 of whether the information is useful. But there's uncertainty. So if the computer in, say, the first run can't determine whether the information is useful or not, it will assign a value somewhere between 0 and 1. And then it might do a second run. So it might look at all the pixels, if it's a picture, divide it up into pixels and give all of the values somewhere, 0 and 1. And then there'll be uncertainty that it has a value between 0 and 1. And then after that, do a second to run and try to gain a more accurate version. And then on the final run, that all the numbers might be adjusted to either 0 or 1.
Yeah, we've come back to this idea so many times, haven't we? About how adaptive information processing, AI type stuff, how that actually adapts. But I guess you could say by changing the parameters, once you get a convergence for one of the coefficients, that's some type of adaptation of prior odds, and then seeing if you can have some type of a global convergence where you can confirm an optimized accuracy. It just necessarily seems to be at least a two-step process, and for that reason very difficult to like make into a cookie cutter algorithm.
Well, it's like the regular perception in the human mind works that way. Gandalf's in the chat. Not sure if you wrap up, but if he wants to come on, you keep it going. But I was mentioning the memes like the rods and cones and the contrast detection, and we have like over 100 million of these receptors that could recept a single photon. But for visual or audio perception, if you think visual perception, that you perceive a shape and there might be certain uncertainty, like, okay, I perceive just a shape and some colors, but haven't assigned it a value. And maybe it's like a person. If you're in a crowd, you go into like some public place and there's 100 people there, and you look around, and so you perceive the people. And if you're thinking about it like in terms of a photon single reception, that each point of information is literally happening a photon at a time, and over time you're gonna get more information. If you're looking at something, you get the first photon and then you get more photons. But from the perception level, if you walk into a room and then there's 50 people and maybe you perceive just women, men, race, color, like hair color, skin color, height, clothing.
We get it. We don't need to go through the list of conceivable attributes. So.
And then, eventually you perceive like, oh, no, that's this person that I know. Like if you walk into the public place and it's like, is that Johnny? But it'd be a perceptual level where like the first time you look at something, you just see a bunch of faces and maybe male, female, certain features, to a level of more information coming that like, no, this is that person that I know, and like this is that feature on their face that's that scar that they have on their face, or the the unique attribution of the facial recognition that I know that it's exactly them. And so if you're conceiving how an AI program would go about that it would be similar to probably the human mind, where you have a screening and you have a bunch of assigned values, and the assigned values have patterns, information in terms of contrast, color, representation, so like people, male, female, attributes, to actual identity, saying like, no, this is this person I know from my memory and have experience with, to like, now I'm going over to actually talking with this person, or something like that. But if you compare that to how an AI algorithm might go about it, from a materialist point of view, you would suppose that it's likely that the computer and the mind use a similar process of going about it. If you're a dualist, you could also believe in dualism in the computer, but you could say the patterns exist in the spiritual realm. So maybe the material realm takes in the photons, and then the spiritual realm, or an alternative realm, connects the patterns to it, even including like shapes or features, that's a function of an alternative realm. And then you'd have some sort of dualistic similar process where it'd be a continually scanning, and each scan would leave uncertainty. And then like eye color, you might walk into a room and glance, and then after a few minutes you might have detailed information like the eye color of everyone in the room, like let alone more esoteric patterns, like saying like, no, I know all the people, I go to my synagogue and I'm friendly or knowledgeable, I've spent much time with all the people there, so there's affiliated memories and experiences and emotions connected to each of the objects of sense perception. And if you want to mathematize the process, you would have, as I said, that it doesn't start out as a 0 or 1. It starts out at some sort of unknown, and that would be like, okay, like I walked in, like, oh, there's a man with brown hair and so and so height, and then the second scan around, you're like, oh, that's Johnny. But it would be a similar process like that with the noise and assessing a value of between 0 and 1. That the first time I looked, I didn't see it was Johnny, but the second time I looked, I had enough information to identify that as Johnny. But saying, well, the first time I looked, I didn't have zeros and ones. I had some numbers between zeros and ones. And the second time I looked, I had enough information that I could fit the numbers to true or false, and so to say zeros and ones.
It's a bit hard to follow the point with all that.
Well, it's just explanation of process. I'm talking about the link that you shared about noise.
It's just unclear how you got to the zeros and ones from the noise. Sorry.
Because that's how computers operate in terms of zeros and ones. So I was just giving an analog to say if the mind operated in terms of zeros and ones. I mean, the computer, you're saying, essentially is recognizing that that's Johnny. So if you have a clear picture where it's just an open field and then Johnny there, or you have a whole bunch of noise and it's still Johnny there, but within the noise. So you're saying if it just instantaneously recognized Johnny, that's zeros and ones. But if it first pass, it recognizes a figure, then the figure may be human, let alone Johnny. And the second pass, like you say, no, it's definitely a human. And then like a third pass, till eventually like, oh, it's Johnny. And so
you do realize that's not how it works, right? That's not how the computer works. The computer has no concept of the man-made stuff. It only cares about brute force.
Well, I'm saying it is
It would
because
never recognize that.
A computer will recognize an object. A computer will decipher useful information from
No
the
one
noise.
can return a ranked list of the most likely relief that it found and then cross-correlate those attributes to most likely identity that's currently defined in the database.
Yes, so I'm saying but the computer could recognize that that's Johnny through the noise.
It's not recognizing Johnniness. It's recognizing sort of statistical distributions of abstract properties that we don't have access to. That's why it's called a black box problem.
If you show the computer, you train the computer, here's a picture of Johnny, and then you have a picture of a bunch of noise where Johnny's there beneath the noise, and then the computer sees that Johnny's there behind the noise.
But it doesn't. It just samples the picture enough times to recognize the properties associated with Johnniness and sufficiently enough contrast to all the other properties that are within the database.
Zeros and ones. So in the computer, it's just zeros and ones.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Number in between. So if you're saying a match on Johnny, so to say, is going to be a 1. That if you give, you train the data so the computer has a 1, this is Johnny, it's a 1.
I don't think there's any 1 ever, because that would imply 100% predictive accuracy. That doesn't exist in training data. You can insist on a particular convergence interval. Like you can say, don't stop until the convergence interval is reached. Brute force any parameter until you reach the convergence interval per data set. You can't reach arbitrarily.
Yeah, but saying as a binary, it makes the decision. So if the computer is forced to decide whether this is Johnny or not, so in the algorithm, like
right, it's forced to make a binary. No one's doubting that. The question is, what's forcing the binary?
Well, it's a rounding of the truth function. So you have the function, and so if Johnny, there's 0.9 something characteristics of Johnny, and so at a certain point, if the code forces it to make a binary decision, it's in whatever its rounding point is, it's either going to round up and make the identification, or it's going to round down and a negative on the identification. And so it's possible the human mind works the same way.
Huh. I wonder if that would explain the uncanny valley.
It's
You
like
know
a
that?
like a chess program where you have an evaluation function in what the best move is. So the computer at a certain point is going to make a move, but the computer's not objectively going to be like this is the best move. It's going to have a value, and then at a certain point, it's going to play the move that has the highest value. And for any identification training, if it's trained where you have an assignment of zeros and ones, that is trained that this is a one, this is match, this is Johnny, and that's your one. Here's your picture of Johnny. You've been told that this is Johnny. That's you information, and then can the computer recognize that in from another scenario or even among noise that the data points are never going to be 100%, but at a certain point it would be binary, and so that's why I said there's a truth discovery function. The value is between 0 and 1, but when you have to make a binary, just like, okay, you can't be both Hindu and Jewish, you can't be this and that can't both be true at the same time because it's a binary. You could only do one or the other. That in my mind, it's like a Schrodinger wave equation. That's a possibility curve and then a probability curve. But when it comes to the binary force decision, that presumably you choose the one with the highest probability. Although you could have models where you don't necessarily choose the one with a higher probability, and there could be criteria for how you choose other than being the highest probability. But mathematically, it means you're rounding up to one. That whatever the case is, or that because when you actually cause that action, then so say when that becomes Johnny, it's a one.
Sure. I don't think anybody denied that.
I mean, you could be in the bar and be like, "Oh, I think that's Johnny," and then you walk over and it's like, "Hey, Johnny," and then like he turns to you and he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were someone else."
Hmm. I thought we were talking about a computer, so you're saying that
the computer would be the same.
The computer functions
like,
on the same basis as our consciousness. Is that right?
No, I'm saying the computer would identify an object, and but the computer, let's say,
the computer identifies whatever constructs the coder told it existed. Simple.
Yes. Well, say if the computer was trained,
there's no reason Johnny would be ever something a computer would be trained on. But anyway.
Well, yes, there is. I mean, saying like, in fact, is the computers are possibly better at facial recognition than we are already. So I mean, that say if it was, but if you trained the computer on an object, and then you hid the object within the noise, let's say you trained the computer on 100 different objects, and then you had noise, and you had various objects hidden among the noise, and you might, so to say, turn up or down the noise. So that if you force the computer to identify objects, the computer might make false identifications.
That's
and
right.
at a certain noise level. So I mean, it is basically the same thing. Like if you have trained the computer on Johnny, and then you have a low quality picture that the computer could point out, like this might be Johnny, and then you have a higher quality picture, it'd be like, no, I'm sorry, it wasn't Johnny, but it had enough points of matches that it thought it was Johnny. And so, I mean, we don't know how the mind operates. So, I mean, we know better how the computer operates than how the mind operates. We know more how the mind operates from psychometric data or experience than the actual intrinsic, internal matter of how what the mind actually does. So, I mean, from that factor, we're more taking from what the computer does and assuming that's what the mind does. So this example, like we could all have the experience of being in a crowded place and thinking we recognize someone we know, and then turning out to not be the not be the who we know. So to say what happened in our mind that was possible, um, you really need to solve the heart problem of consciousness. As we're a computer, you could no, we can understand the algorithm of how it's possible that the computer uh, would make a false identification and um, then later correct its identification.
What was that last thing you said? Sorry, the computer would correct its own identification. It's unclear to what extent that's a thing.
Well, I mean, good programs would be percent. So if you had facial recognition software in a public place, and like if it was police software they're looking for, or whatever, where you had, uh, um, whatever, just generic, let's say facial recognition software, and the computer might have possible matches of a various feature based on noisy data. And as it gets more and more data, it could um, select and become more and more accurate. So I mean, if you picture if you had the computer trained on 100 people and then they're in a crowd and it sees a face in a noisy scenario and it limits it down to 3 possibilities that it might be, and it could even be a false identification, where, I mean, depending on how you have the computer program, where the computer is going to identify through the noise that this is the identity of the person, and then it gets more information. But I say the computer wouldn't necessarily you would have to program it in a certain way that would make a false identity, because the computer would more likely have a probability curve, factor, that there's certain points of recognition that make it likely that this is the identity, and then would need more information. But if you had the computer programmed where it just identified the most likely person, so it's saying that there's noise, and through the noise, it has to it has to pick from its database the most likely person in the database that it is through the noise, then the computer will make a false identification and then later correct that.
And what's the force of correction?
The correction is the data point. So if a computer trains on a face, there's multiple points of data, like the distance between eyes or features or mouth and nose, that it could train on the data. And so if you have, like right now you have the profile view on me. So if the computer trains on a straight mugshot of me, and then you have a side view of me, there's uncertainty. So it doesn't, so if it's training on like how far my eyes are apart or the lips are apart, it could also have information from a side view. But if the computer is programmed to give an identity of the most likely identification of the person, it's going to take whatever data points it has and match it, and then assign that identity to it. And as it gets more data points, it could correct it and see, like, okay, it had the side view, but when I looked at the camera, and then it didn't match the data points, and they thought it was Johnny, but really it's Doooovid.
I see.
I mean, this is actually how the programs work. I mean, I always see like a documentary, read a paper on facial recognition, and I mean, there's your general features, most, the distance between eyes or lips, or
I wasn't talking about facial recog. I was talking about generalized image interpreting. Like, I wanted to take it way more abstract than just facial recognition, which requires a very specific type of data.
But any image where the computer is going to...
Well, the manner in which it works for facial recog, interpersonal variation, is not the same as it would work in general. And I want to get at why they work more so than how precisely they've been implemented.
You could take it on the simple level, just like if you had shapes like square, circle, triangle, oval, or whatever, and the computer is going to assign a shape based on the information, and as it gets more information, it will self-correct. But if the algorithm requires it to assign a shape based on its information. It will assign a shape based on its information, and then it'll self-correct as it gets more data.
Self-correct as it gets more data. Sure, well, there's two ways it could self-correct. I just want to make it clear that, yeah, once it's deployed, it wouldn't be self-correcting so much anymore, practically speaking.
No, I mean, it self-corrects as it gets more data.
In theory, but in practice, I wouldn't necessarily assert that. Just how, I don't know how you get that idea.
Well, I mean, if you compare it to like the eye, and you have receptors, and the receptors are constantly receiving more photons. So it's like, what's the data source of, so if it's just a limited, so you're showing a picture and it's not getting more data, it's not going to get more data. Or if it has all the information, if it's a noisy picture and it can't clarify the picture, and there's no more information. But if you have like a camera or more pictures where there's going to be more information coming.
Well, practically, there are different classes of problems, right? Like you could think about the class of self-driving car problems versus the class of really good quality data problems, like facial data, for example. Like if people have driver licenses, those are easy to get for training data, right? Versus generalized objects versus generalized moving. So I'd say the car problem and like stuff like the interocular distance problem and stuff like that with facial recog, where you have good data, those are almost two ends of the spectrum of what the tech's being deployed for now, and just want to get to why it works. Muse asks, would it be easier to organize information using geometric representations of categories and sets? I'll go ahead and answer that.
Well, we're talking visual data, it's generally going to be geometric, although it could be algebraic in terms of distances. Like it's like facial recognition isn't necessarily looking for shapes. It's looking for, it is looking for shapes, but it's looking for proportions or distance between shapes. So it's, but any sorts of information. So if it's a chess program, it may not be geometric. If it's a sound program or whatever, but I mean, in essence, it's the point for like multiple truth hypothesis. Whatever it is, whatever the data points are, it's going to be an assignment of a number between 0 and 1, where 0 is false and 1 is true. And meaning 1 is a match, absolute match of whatever the piece of information that it has certainty about, to matching it to that. And a 0 is certainty that it's not that whatever object it has, that whatever they're saying, it's not that, it's something different.
Nice. I was impressed that you were able to give that long of a dissertation from seemingly nothing. Where'd you learn that from?
Well, we did that stream on multiple truth hypothesis on artificial intelligence. We even did the slideshow. I told you I was reading that book on logic, and I read papers all the time on computer programming or watching videos on the latest artificial intelligence. I haven't shared any in the last few weeks, but yeah, I'm constantly studying that stuff.
So people in the chat are asking about quaternions. I think we've covered this at some stage. I just looked it up again, and I did go into this, if memory serves, at some point.
Okay, you want to wrap up, or are you going to keep on rambling?
Tinkle wants to know. I mean, you want to have a look at the question there, and if you want to.
Yeah, I didn't really follow. I mean, I did actually watch in 2-speed some of it, but I didn't actually listen to it. I sped through just because I was It's I guess one of the bigger communal gathering events. But like no, not a sports fan, not really a music fan in general. So I didn't have much thoughts. I mean, it's a statement on a collective karma, obviously, because that's one of the largest mass gatherings or mass attention where there's hundreds of millions of people focused on the exact same thing. So that you could look at that as a sign of our karma. Whatever the implications of that is, that so many people are focused on whatever reason. Most people are never the joint attention. I spoke about joint attention. I haven't mentioned my Ben Watkins top debate that joint attention could be an argument for the spiritual realm and the soul, because joint attention is something that's harder to explain according to physicalistic processes. What does it mean that two different minds have attention on the same thing at the same time? So that's my only thought. Like Kabbalistically in the Super Bowl, that there are karmatic implications to joint attention, and that would be one of the largest joint attention events of the year is certainly significant.
Awesome. Well, I don't see any questions in the chat, so I guess we can wrap up and see everybody next week, if not sooner. We sort of have these impromptu events, not always planned in advance, but we'll try to get out some type of announcement for them. So thanks for offering to help out Titan. And yeah, thanks for participating in the show, Doowovid.
Okay, yeah, have a great week.